Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the January 30th, 2023 meeting of Portsmouth Planning Board. Calling the meeting to order. Peter Harris will not be joining us this evening. Andrew Simonis will sit for Peter. I haven't heard from Joe Almeida. He may join us a little bit late. We have a Is this any better? Yes. Just wasn't close enough. Thank you. So I just called the meeting to order. Andrew Simonis will be sitting for Peter Harris, who won't be joining us this evening. I'm not sure about Joe Almeida. He may join us late. This is a planning board public hearing and receipt of staff presentation on the proposed zoning amendments for the accessory dwelling unit provisions of the zoning ordinance. The Land Use Committee has been working on this topic for about a year, and we've been working with Rick Tainter and the planning staff and others. Mr. Tainter is here to present. He will begin the meeting with his presentation on what the proposed amendments contain. I'll open the public hearing after that, and the public hearing is going to stay open through board comment, so the public will have an opportunity to speak after staff presentation and after board comment. Mr. Tainter, would you like to present?
Thank you. As the chair mentioned, I'm Rick Tainter. I've been working with assisting the Land Use Committee and the Planning Department staff probably since about August, I think. I started getting involved, going through the revision of the city's zoning ordinance provisions regarding accessory dwelling units and garden apartments, two sections of the ordinance. And it was quite a comprehensive revision. This is going to be a long but really collapsed presentation. I'll try to do is get hit the high points, and then we can talk about any questions as we go along. So could I have the next slide, please, Peter? So the purpose of these changes there were really three purposes, and they were set out, I think, in the original charge to the Land Use Committee to remove barriers and provide more flexibility for the creation of accessory dwelling units, to strengthen provisions to ensure that ADUs fit into established neighborhood patterns and to minimize any adverse impacts on abutting properties, and to simplify the ordinance and to make it easier for users to understand and navigate the ordinance. You may not agree with that when you see it, but that's the intent. In brief, I'm not going to go through all of these at this point. We're going to go through all of these throughout the presentation. In the use table, we added more detail to the use table, and a big thing was folding the garden cottages provisions into the use table, into the category of accessory dwelling units. So we will no longer have a garden cottage category. We added information about the purpose and tried to clarify the eligibility of properties to support accessory dwelling units. We have standards, three sections of standards. I think there was one section of standards to begin with, but because we added quite a few standards, we felt it necessary to break it into three headings. So there's standards that apply to all accessory dwelling units, which relate to things like ownership and owner occupancy, maximum number of bedrooms, and the off-street parking requirements. And then separate sets of standards for attached ADUs and for detached ADUs. And then there's a new section on architectural design standards, which has been beefed up quite a bit from the previous draft. Revised standards for review and approval and for post-approval requirements. Next year. Next slide.
Here we go.
Okay. So in the table of uses, we have there previously was just one category for attached accessory dwelling units, and the new proposed revision breaks this into two types of attached ADUs. The first type is up to 750 square feet of gross floor area and entirely within an existing single-family dwelling unit. So you just take an existing home and you carve out a piece of it as an attached accessory dwelling unit. And then the second subcategory is more than 750 square feet or expansion or addition to an existing building, an existing principal single-family dwelling unit. Now, the first category, up to 750 square feet and entirely within an existing single-family dwelling, is proposed to be allowed by right in seven zoning districts. Those are all the residential districts except for the garden apartment district, and then the mixed residential districts, and then the CD4 character districts. And then by conditional use permit in the gateway districts. The ones with more than 750 square feet or an expansion or addition to an existing dwelling unit is in the same zoning districts, but all of them would require a conditional use permit. So there's an additional level of control or review for larger accessory dwelling units or those that involve some type of structural change to the existing single-family dwelling. Next slide, please, Peter. Then under detached accessory dwelling units, we have 4 different subcategories. And the first one is really similar to the existing garden cottage provision in the ordinance. So in place of garden cottage, we would have this detached accessory dwelling unit up to 600 square feet and in an existing accessory building that complies with all standards for accessory buildings. So if you had a garage and it was compliant with all the setbacks for accessory buildings and height and so forth, then it could be converted into a detached accessory dwelling unit of up to 600 square feet. And that would be by right in the 7 districts, the residential districts, mixed residential districts, and the CD4 districts. The second subcategory is up to 600 square feet in an existing accessory building, where in cases where the building doesn't comply with all standards for an accessory dwelling, for an accessory structure, or requires a modification of the standards or a variance, or includes an expansion. And so that would be permitted in the same zoning districts, but by conditional use permit only. The third category, those first 2 again are existing accessory buildings. The third and fourth categories are new accessory buildings or new structures that would house an accessory dwelling unit. And the first or the third category here is up to 750 square feet in a new building that complies with all the lot and building dimensional standards for a single family dwelling. So where the top blue category there is about the standard, complying with the standards for an accessory structure, the third one down, the second blue category, must comply with all the standards for a single family dwelling, so larger setbacks, for example. And that would require a conditional use permit in the same 7 districts. And then the final one is the largest one, up to 1,000 square feet gross floor area in a new building that either does not comply with a dimensional standard for a single-family dwelling or that requires any variance to construct it. And that would only be allowed in 3 residential or 5 residential districts, the rural, the 2 single residence districts, and GRA and GRB. Okay, next slide. In the purpose and eligibility section, there's a revised purpose section that explains what the purpose of these EDUs is, and that's to increase the supply of smaller, more affordable housing units without the need for more infrastructure or further land development, to meet local housing needs and provide opportunities for adapted reuse of existing accessory structures. And it says the standards are intended to integrate more housing options into the community with a minimal negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood. There's some tweaks to the language in the purpose section, and then a clarification that because Portsmouth has, as I'm sure you know, has something that many communities don't have, not only a minimum lot area, but also a minimum lot area per dwelling unit in the ordinance. And so this clarifies that accessory dwelling units are subject to all applicable municipal standards for single-family dwellings, zoning and non-zoning, and that comes out of the state law, with 2 exceptions. One is it does not need to comply with the minimum lot area per dwelling unit. So it needs to comply with the minimum lot area, but not the minimum lot area per dwelling unit. And that existing accessory buildings don't have to comply with the requirements for single-family dwellings. They have to comply with the dimensional controls for accessory structures. Next. One of the big things that came out of the discussions it had to do with off-street parking. And so this really clarifies, we hope, that parking has to be required. So you have the 2 spaces for the existing single-family dwelling, and then for an accessory dwelling unit up to 750 square feet, you would need 1 additional parking space, and for over 750 square feet, you would need 2 additional parking spaces. So that means if you have an accessory dwelling unit with that's a smaller accessory dwelling unit under 750 square feet, the owner would have to supply a minimum of 3 off-street parking spaces. And for a larger ADU, the owner would have to supply 4 parking spaces. Go ahead. So now getting into the revised standards, and as I said, there's quite a few. Some of them are tweaks, some of them are more substantive. We've carried forward here. Well, first of all, we've said that an accessory dwelling unit can be increased up to 1,000 square feet by a conditional use permit in certain cases. We've also specified in this section that there's no more than 2 bedrooms for any accessory dwelling unit. And I'm sorry, did we skip a space here? No, I guess we didn't. Sorry. I'll just wing it here. And then we included an affidavit of restriction for the owner occupancy in the, it has to be recorded in the registry of deeds to enforce that. Now, in this slide, so the attached accessory dwelling units can be increased in floor area up to 1,000 square feet by conditional use permit. This simply repeats the second subcategory of accessory dwelling units in the use table. And then there are new standards that relate to the idea of subordination of the attached accessory dwelling unit to the principal single-family dwelling. And that subordination talks about where doors are located, talks about if there an addition or expansion has to be either recessed or projected at least 18 inches from the existing front wall, so you don't get a really long front wall to the building. Any garage that's added has to be recessed at least 10 feet from the existing front wall, so the house isn't dominated by a garage facing the street. And then there was a lot of discussion about how to deal with height and horizontal expansions. And the last 2 bullets here really deal with that. Single-story dwelling, like a ranch house, can be expanded either vertically by 1 story to have the accessory dwelling unit, or horizontally, in which case there's no increase in building height. So that's the first bullet for a single-story dwelling. For a non-single-story dwelling, an addition or expansion that includes a vertical expansion that includes a horizontal expansion must be no higher than any horizontal expansion must be no higher than 75% of the height of the existing structure. And I think that pretty much covers it. There's a lot of complications in the ways we looked at this, and we revised a lot of the language in that section. Moving ahead to detached. And I want to say there's a mistake here. The second item here, maximum expansion of existing accessory building, that's a mistake. You should ignore that. What we did here is say that the maximum, again, the maximum size of a detached ADU is 750 square feet, unless a conditional use permit is granted to increase it to 1,000 square feet. But probably more important, the maximum size of the building containing the detached ADU is 1,600 square feet, or 75% of the principal building's floor area. So what that means is you could have a 750 square foot ADU on an upper level of a larger building, but the sum of all the floors of the building could not exceed 1,600 square feet. Let's see. That's good. So a new detached accessory dwelling unit It has to be placed at least 10 feet further from the front lot line than an existing building. The building height no greater than 22 feet. If the detached accessory dwelling unit is taller than the principal building, so in other words, if the existing building is a single story that's less than 22 feet high, then there has to be increased setbacks from all property lines based on that change, on that difference in height. The building footprint for a detached accessory dwelling unit can't be greater than 750 square feet. So that's, again, that's looking at the entire building, not just the unit within the building. The building and, the phrasing is wrong there. The building within which the DADU is located can be no greater than 1,600 square feet. I've covered that already. And then if there are dormers added to the roof of a detached accessory dwelling unit, they can only be outside required setbacks and no more than 1/3 of the roof plane area. And the reason for being outside the required setbacks is for privacy for abutting property owners. And then just kind of general requirements that the ADU comply with all drainage and lighting requirements of the zoning ordinance and with minimum building separation requirements of the building code. Okay. There are detailed architectural design standards that I'm not really going to get into. They just say that the building has to be the same or similar to the existing principal building with respect to the items that are listed here, the bulleted items, and that if the items on the right are provided, they're not provided in all accessory buildings, they again have to be the same or similar to the corresponding elements on the principal building. So it's architectural design consistency with the existing principal building, not necessarily with surrounding areas. Okay. So I guess I don't have a slide for the review and approval process, but there's a detailed process about public notice for an application for an accessory dwelling unit has been or will be submitted, and then there's a determination by the planning director as to whether the ADU complies with the requirements. If there's an ADU that shows in the use table as a P, as a permitted use, and the planning director finds that it does not comply with some provision, then it automatically gets bumped to a conditional use permit. And then there are findings for the planning board to make regarding accessory dwelling units before granting a conditional use permit. The ADU has to comply with all the applicable standards. The exterior design is consistent with the principal dwelling. The site plan provides adequate and appropriate open space and landscaping and complies with the off-street parking requirements. And the ADU will maintain a compatible relationship to adjacent properties in terms of location, design, and off-street parking. And that's actually in the existing ordinance. And then the planning board can modify standards, and that's also in the existing ordinance. And then there are these post-approval requirements, which are really pretty much the same as in the existing ordinance. No significant change there. And yes, then we made changes, some small changes to the off-street parking requirements. So this is not in the Article 8 section. This is in Article 11, and the change was essentially to there's an exemption for single and two-family dwellings, or actually, yeah, for single and two-family dwellings regarding the location of parking spaces, and we're just including the parking spaces that are associated with the accessory dwelling unit in that exemption. And then there are minor revisions to the definition of accessory building and structure, detached accessory dwelling unit, and deletion of the term garden cottage. And that is a quick summary.
Thank you. I think I may have heard it wrong, but just one quick thing in case anybody else was keeping notes. I believe when you were talking about lot area, which is mentioned in the state statute, you said that these accessory dwelling units had to be on a lot that conformed to the minimum lot area. I believe they can be on non-conforming lots as well. There's a provision for that. Is that correct?
I suppose they would be able to comply with non-conforming, if it's a legal non-conforming lot, yes. Because that would be the
Yes.
same, that would be the same requirement as for, as applies to a single-family dwelling.
Right. And I know we have our principal planner available by Zoom. Did you have anything to add, Nick? Nick is...
Not at the moment. Yeah,
okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Take care of yourself.
I'll wait for questions. I'm
going to open the public hearing. Any members of the public have questions, please direct them to me, and then we'll get into board discussion after we hear from the public. As usual, please give your name and address as you begin.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. I guess I really have one question. I'm not clear about how big these units can be. It says 1,000 square feet, and I find that a little big. My house is 1,100 square feet. So if we're saying 1,000 square feet, that's almost a full house. And I'm in favor of this whole process of having capability of putting an in-law, a little apartment on or something like that. But I really think that we need to stick with the state standards. Now, it was kind of mumble jumbled, so I don't know if something changed from what I read, because this was definitely a different presentation than what I had experienced in the reading of the documents that were presented. But so maybe it changed and I missed it. But I would go back to the state recommendation and not have it as 1,000 feet, because that is a big unit. I don't see these, and I know Councilor Moreau has said this in her meetings when I've watched them. They're not necessarily they're there to support our aging population. They're there to support our X generation that has to move home. I don't see them to be a unit that people are going to build to make a lot of money on. So there again is another reason to move it back down to the state amount of square footage. I do ask that you think about that. I lived in many of these neighborhoods, from Bartlett Strip to Union Street to Little Harbor, and a lot of those houses I can't imagine having a unit that big and is in addition to their neighborhoods. So I would ask that you consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in and if I misspeak, Mr. Tainter, please let me know. But the state statute provides a lower threshold. We can't require units to be of a certain small size. And it also says you have to allow 2 bedrooms. So just as a point of clarification, that is in the state law. I'm not advocating anything. I'm just trying to explain it. Next person.
Roy Helsel, 777 Middle Road, Unit 22. Question I have is on the variances, are you going to let them go within 5 feet of the property line? Within 5 foot of it with a variance? And the other thing is, are all neighbors going to be, abutting neighbors going to be knowledgeable about the person doing this? That's all I have.
Good evening, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. So, since I have never seen this presentation before and I had been to all of the meetings, I'm going to go by the standards that were addressed in Article 8 and ask questions and address that. The first question I would have, Mr. Chair, since you've requested we ask you, is on 10814-24. Who is going to verify on the occupation, and how are the sewer services going to be verified? That's my first question. Next, The ADU shall be no larger than 750 gross floor area, except as permitted through a conditional use permit as provided by 10440. In no case shall an ADU be larger than 1,000 square feet gross foot area. My house, like former Councilor Kennedy, the footprint is less than 1,000 square feet. This is too large for an accessory dwelling unit, whether it be included in the house or detached, in my opinion. I strongly object to 1,000 square feet being put in here, and I ask you to look at this very carefully. The next thing, the building height. I appreciate that you changed based on the input from what we had before. In 10.814.333, the building height of any addition or expansion that includes an increase in the building footprint shall be no greater than 75% of the height of the existing building. Great. This is for a single-family dwelling. I'm only asking for one word here. In the case only of a single-story building or principal building. On 10.814.41, again, the same issue here. This is DADUs, shall not be larger than 750 square feet except as permitted through a conditional use permit. So on one hand, you say it shall not be greater than 750, which, by the way, is what came down from the state and RSA 674.31. So what I'm asking is that you take out or delete 10.814.411. In no case shall the DDAU be greater than 1,000 square feet. Just from my perspective, please take that out. Next, 10.814.412. In no case shall the DADU that was created from an existing accessory building that does not comply with the minimum yard requirements for a principal structure be larger than 600 square feet in gross area. This doesn't meet the standards the way they are now. If you go to the next page, you have a contradiction on 10.814.435. The gross floor area of the entire building containing the DADU shall be no greater than 1,600 square feet. And the one above that says 10.814.434. The building footprint of the entire building containing the DADU shall be no greater than 750. This is very confusing. The whole point of doing this was to make it easier for people to understand this. You have contradictions in both places here. Please review. Next, let's see. In your whole section of DADUs, you don't have parking addressed where I could see it. I looked through the down to 10.81453, where you describe the width of a garage, but you don't describe any parking here. If the parking is described in the attached, why isn't it described here? Or is the user just supposed to assume that that is included? I would like to thank whoever put in the architectural standard designs. I think we need to be consistent in the neighborhoods, and I think that was a great addition. The notification, 10.814.611. For a period of at least 30 days from the date of application to the city, the property owner shall post notice provided by the city that describes the proposed ADU. That is a great sentence, but on the back, at the very end, it says, furthermore, the sign they shall post a sign with the information shall be mailed to the abutter. So I would ask that you put those two together so it is clear to all abutters that there will be a sign placed there and they will have a mailed notification before anything happens as far as DADUs. The other question I have is on the administrative approval by the planning director. you have contradicting statements here. This is 10.814.612. The determination as to whether an ADU complies with all of the requirements shall be by administrative approval by the planning director. If the planning director determines that the application does not comply with any of the standards in this section, the ADU shall require a conditional use permit. The next one says the planning board. So I guess I would ask, why would you have the planning director do an administrative approval? The administrative approval does not require any notice to abutters. And the administrative approval could be the interpretation of a staff member on this. This deprives all the abutters of due process. And if you want to go into due process of property rights, there is a court case, Calwada versus Litchfield, and it's very specific to property rights. The only time there is a constitutional right to be heard at a public meeting is during public hearing concerning a matter which affects a person's property rights. The people who abut any of these properties have property rights also. I think this is one of the big ones that you really need to consider as far as notifying abutters and just doing an administrative approval by a staff member. The next one contradicts this. 10.814.6.2, when section 10.440 requires conditional use permit for an attached or detached ADU, the planning board shall make the following findings. So you switch back and forth right in the next sentence. I think that, oh, no. On the last one, 10.814.7.2. This was a little confusing to me because I went through all of the permitting processes in the city. And you're adding this, post-approval requirements. A certificate of use is issued by the planning department. Is that really the planning department or is that the building department? First question. Required to verify compliance with the standards of this section, including the owner. Then it goes on, occupancy and principal residency requirements, that's fine. Said certificate shall be issued by the planning department upon issuance of a certificate of occupancy by the inspection department and shall be renewed annually upon submission of such documentation as the planning board may require to verify this. So if you require additional documentation, please tell either the person who is applying here or the abutters what will be required of them up front. You don't want to get them to the end and they thought they did everything and then they still have to have further requirements of paperwork. That would be my comment on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Liza Hewitt, 726 Middle Road. I guess I'll be brief for two things. I'm going to say this because I've said it in every one of the land use committee meetings. The parking, I feel strongly it should be one spot per bedroom on that. The other is the lot area. I hope there'll be some discussion around that. There really wasn't any discussion around it at the land use committee meetings. And when I asked about it at the November meeting, Beverly Mesa Zent, who was the planning director at the time, said she felt that that was one of the biggest changes in this, is that before it was required that if you had those two dwelling units, the ADU and the main unit on the property, it was at least 3,000 square feet, and now my understanding is that you are only counting it as one dwelling unit, which is the main house, and which means that it only requires 1,500 square feet. At least that's the way it was explained to me at that November meeting. And if that is the case, I have some real concerns about what that will do to the density in neighborhoods, because it seems to me that if you're now putting two dwelling units on essentially one lot area size, it's going to be a lot more dense, and I'm concerned about what that will be like for neighborhoods. So I hope you'll have a discussion or explain to me what maybe I don't understand, but that was the way it was explained. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Elizabeth Bratter, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. There are a lot of good things in this ordinance change. There are a lot of details. Having gone to the Land Use Committee's meetings, quite a few of them, it was hashed out, and there was a lot of work put into this. But there are many, many details that are coming together, and obviously some need to just be cleaned up and others need to be addressed. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is the 1,000 square feet. And so I have rental units, and if you have a two-bedroom, and you've got one bedroom which is 12 by 10, that's 120 feet, and then you have another bedroom that's also 12 by 10, that's another 120 feet. You give yourself a good-sized living room, that's 14 by 10, that's 140 feet. A 10 by 10 kitchen would be 100 feet, and an 8 by 8 bathroom, that's a good-sized bathroom in this area, would be 64 feet. That would be 544 square feet for that apartment. So if you wanted to go big, you could make the bedrooms 14 by 10. You could go 160-foot living room, 100-foot kitchen, 100-foot bathroom. That's a good-sized bathroom. You could have company in there. It's going to be 640. Now, if I want to get to 750, I can generously add on a 10 by 10 deck on the back, and now I'm going to be close to 750. So just to get an idea of how big a 750 square foot accessory unit is. So when you start to go up, you want to get up to 840, you can do a 240 square foot bedroom, a 200 square foot bedroom, a 200 square foot living room, a 100-foot bathroom, and a 100-foot kitchen. Now you're only at 840. So the goal of this conversation is just to make you aware that, to me, when I think of an accessory dwelling unit, I think of a 12 by 10 bedroom, a 14 by 10 living room, because it's going to be a living room, kitchen room, dining room type thing, maybe a 10 by 10 kitchen, a 64 square foot, which is an 8 by 8 bath, which is 424 square feet. So I think we're going really big here. We're being very generous. Some of these are close to 3-bedroom apartment sizes here in Portsmouth. So just to keep that in mind when you're thinking about distinguishing between 600 square feet and 1,000. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Evan Mullen, 82 Austin Street. Just a few comments. Generally speaking, I think this is a big step forward for revisions regarding accessory dwelling units, which I think are an excellent opportunity to provide some good solutions for our ongoing housing issue here in the state of New Hampshire and, of course, in Portsmouth. These, I think, in general are helping reduce some of the restrictions on ADUs that are currently in the zoning. I would just add that I think under the right circumstances, it would be reasonable to consider a waiver to the parking requirements in the right neighborhoods and under the right application circumstances. My other comment is about the architectural design standards. This is a great addition. However, I think that the first 2 bullet points in here could cover the majority of what the objectives are for the design standards, and the subsequent bullet points, again, I think they restrict some flexibility and opportunity to provide some architectural styles and materials that would be inspiring and progressive here in the city. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody on Zoom?
We have two people on Zoom. If anyone would like to speak, please. Okay. Zelita Morgan.
Zelita Morgan?
Yes, hi, Zelita, Richards Avenue. I have a quick question, and I appreciate all the speakers and getting a little bit more insight into how big it is, or they can be, or they can get to. And considering how large or how big they can be, as other speakers have described, so do they really fit into this description of being accessory dwellings? I think that's one question. And the second question is, I've read a few of the materials, and the language around, I mean, our resources are limited, right? And what is the, how has the impact of these dwelling units, right, will be in terms of our environment, impervial, sewage. So what is the adequacy of our resources, and how has this been assessed, if it has been assessed? And again, this is, Portsmouth cannot be, this is here a side opinion and comment. Portsmouth is not going to solve the problems of affordable housing in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire has a taxation system that's very different, and we could go on, and that's not the purpose of this meeting here. But with that said, we kind of have to look into also the character of our neighborhoods. What is going to be the character? And communication with abutters. Will abutters be, or will whatever proposed ordinance require all abutters to be notified regardless of the size, regardless of the type of dwelling, because some of these can be like really a house, right? So I would appreciate if you considering these thoughts, and thank you for the work you've been doing. And that was it.
Thank you. We have another?
We do have another, but they haven't raised their hand. So
Okay. Does the board want to have the staff answer any of these public questions, or do we want to get into it? Greg?
I have 3 questions, slant comments for staff. I'm a little surprised that with 2 sections, terms and definitions, you didn't take the time to add the district zoning codes so that people could understand what the columns meant. I think that that should be added immediately. Do you know what I mean? It's not in there. The next thing, why did you guys decide to go to 7 digits with 2 decimal points instead of sticking with all the other zoning in the city, which is 5 digits and 1 decimal point? So I'll just back up. The goal of everything that we've done so far was to simplify ADUs and lower the cost of doing ADUs. And those 2 steps are completely backwards. So those need to change. Architectural design standards. Your intent, I haven't gotten an answer yet, so I'm just going to continue.
Actually, I'm just trying to catch up with you. So the existing zoning has 10.814.33, let's say. We're changing it from 10.84.33 to 10.814.24. So we haven't added any numbers in the numbering system.
I just looked up the zoning. It was 5 digits and 1 decimal. So I'm not sure what you're looking at.
Okay, if you look at the, I'm sorry, if you look at the existing zoning, for example, the under 10.814 accessory dwelling units, unless I'm totally mistaken.
I may be as well, but
I'll look at it.
I'm back to the goal of simplifying and lowering cost, and so far I don't see any of that.
Okay.
And back to my original thing, why is there no footnotes or table helping the people that are trying to read this to determine what the different zoning codes mean?
I mean, they're in the existing zoning ordinance, so we could copy them into here.
But somebody's not going to read the whole zoning ordinance to find the zoning codes for the districts that you're trying to apply the ADUs to. Or there's no reference to the page in the zoning codes of where they can find that.
It's fine. Yep. I mean, that's an easy thing to fix.
Good. Architectural design standards. We talked about this at the various meetings. Apparently nobody was listening. Good intent, but the level of detail that you're requiring and the use of the words shall instead of should is overbearing. And my examples back then were, we've got a lot of old housing stock in this town. And if you've got a nice house on Middle Street or Islington or something like that has a slate roof that's 40 years old and probably costs $200 a square foot to replace, and you want to put a little ADU, on a shed, you shouldn't have to have a slate roof on the ADU. Furthermore, I mean, in houses I've remodeled, you'll have mahogany doors, mahogany window frames, mahogany trim everywhere. You simply can't require somebody to put mahogany trim and doors and windows on an ADU. Now you're at $400 a square foot. So using the term shall and going to the level of detail is financially ridiculous.
Understood.
So we should figure out a way to meet the intent of architectural design standards without requiring identical materials, which is exactly what it says.
It does say same or similar. I think we tried to say same or similar to be.
What's similar to mahogany? I mean, I tried to do something in a historic district and they wouldn't let me use AZAC. They made me use pine, which was ridiculous. I said, thank you. It cost me half as much.
I believe the sections that relate to conditional use permit do give the board flexibility under 81463.
I agree, but I think this board would be flexible, but I'm afraid other boards would interpret mahogany to be mahogany.
Okay,
That's all I have.
thank you. Yes, Andrew.
Certainly more of a visual person, and I think that there's a lot of revisions here. I guess I was unsuspecting of some of them, but nonetheless, on the single-story dwellings, adding one story and keeping that in compliance with an ADU, I'm wondering how that's done in practice and if we have any visual examples of that. And the reason I bring it up is because if you go to neighborhoods such as Maple Haven or that area off of Route 1, you may see a row of single-story ranch homes with an additional story there. And in my mind, I can't see that floor plan and layout acting and complying with the other ADU standards. And so I'm just hoping that we can have a visual that supports or dictates that.
I think, I'm not sure if this is going to be a question for Councilor Moreau or Rick. I believe the city's new housing coordinator is going to be working on a manual.
Yes, I just spoke to him about it this afternoon.
And will that address some of this?
It'll basically walk any homeowner through the code and how they apply it to their home, so it should simplify it and put it in plain terms. So their job is to take this code and make it so that any homeowner can pick up the guide. But of course, we have to finalize this in order to give them something to write the guide off of. So it'll help them, anyone be able to pick up the guide and be able to say, okay, this is my house, this is what zone I'm in. These are the things that I might be affected by.
So it'll be a process manual, not necessarily a visual manual? We don't know
To be
yet.
determined.
We don't know
We
yet.
don't know yet. It's just the idea that is one of the tasks once this is finalized, to be able to have a manual for it.
Yeah, and although what I'm bringing up is extremely nuanced and I guess specified, it's really kind of intentional. And I think that we have very nuanced and specific housing here that, much like Greg just pointed out, is hard to replicate. And if you're giving them no other design standard except you can't be more than just one story above it, that to me just gets too vague. And so I'm trying to be very intentional in these examples so that when they come to us in a proposal, we can be prepared and have an educated background with it. So I guess that's my first point. And my second point is, right now we have an ordinance that dictates a micro unit can be 400 square feet. And we've had projects permitted and existing housing stock that have units of that size where we still get questions about parking and we still get questions about density and how many people are allowed in those types of units. And moving forward, I feel as though Portsmouth will become more of that more efficient housing stock. And this 1,000 square feet in my head is just really intensive for a lot of neighborhoods. And adding the fact that they'll have to go to a conditional use permit in my head is, sure, it's another row of acknowledgement and approval, but it doesn't really help us trim down this question of size. And so overall point being is there's a correlative effect between more square footage and more parking and more people. And I'm not sure that adding 250 square feet on top of the 750 is a solution or it's just a reach. And so now my point to you and my question to you after all that is I would be really interested in seeing how many proposals came to us in the last 2 or 3 years that requested an ADU of at least 1,000 square feet. And if there was a purpose and reason to those proposals that person wanted that much square footage.
So I don't know, I know the staff knows, but I don't know the details of each unit that have come in. But I know the staff has collected that data. What I would say about the 750 versus 1,000, and I don't have a strong feeling either way. This is just how the discussion came out in the Land Use Committee. Right now, in the existing ordinance, 1,000 square feet is allowed given a certain amount of lot area. And so what the committee did was say, let's extend that to just allow it by conditional use permit. And there are two things that went on here. One is going from conditional use permit to as of right use for the smaller units, for the units under 750 square feet or under 600 square feet for an existing accessory building. And so that was meant to make it easier for those small units to be permitted. Then the committee also said, well, let's look at expanding that 1,000 square feet for detached or attached units, given specific additional requirements. So it's not for every unit, but it's just for, you have to look at it and look at the conditional use criteria and the additional, the stricter dimensional standards like the setbacks. I had one more thing I was going to say. Oh yes, and then the third part of that is that for a detached accessory structure, because we're looking here not only at, as I'm sure you're aware, we're looking at the square footage of the accessory dwelling unit itself, the footprint of the building that has the accessory dwelling unit in it, and the total square footage of the building that has the accessory dwelling unit in it. So yes, under certain situations, you could allow by conditional use permit 1,000 square foot accessory dwelling unit, but that would have to be in a building that only had a 750 square foot footprint. So it would be, it could be a 1.5 story building, for example, or it could be a floor area above a 2-car garage. And the floor area of the garage counts as part of that 1,600, or that it counts as part of the 750 square foot footprint and the 1,600 square foot total floor area. And in addition, the total square footage can't be more than 75% of the existing single family dwelling. So if, there are examples, and I know that they're true, of a 1,000 square foot existing single family dwelling, that single family dwelling could only have, regardless of what anything else it says in the ordinance, it could only have a 750 square foot accessory dwelling unit, because it can't be more than 700, the whole building can't be more than 75% of the floor area of the single family dwelling. All these things, there's so many moving parts and they all kind of work together.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that, and I understand the complexity of it. I think when again, it goes back to a proposal. So imagine if you were somebody coming to us and we were reviewing a proposal from you, the question that always passes through my head is this in the spirit of the ordinance? And obviously if you're approaching 750 square feet on a 1,000 square foot primary residence, you have to scratch your head and wonder what the intent is and then how that's going to blend. And if that 1,000 square foot residence is still at the 1,000 square feet in 2023, there's a good chance that probably it couldn't have been expanded otherwise. So then you start to ask, well, what kind of intensity and density is going to be created by permitting this 750 square feet in addition to? So
Could I just add one more thing there?
Yeah.
And the thing I think we kind of lose track of is that the state law says that we can't require the accessory dwelling unit to be less than 750 square feet or less than 2 bedrooms. So that's an area we're stuck with at 750. We can argue about the 1,000,
I
but we're
understand.
stuck with the 750.
I understand. Yeah. And again, it's like when you pull a string on a sweater and it just keeps going and going. So I'm trying to prevent that string from just going on and on and on, where we have 1,000 square foot ADU, and I live on Richards Ave. I live in a house that is exactly 1,000 square feet. And I can tell you that if you were to add that to any other house on Richards Ave, if you were to add my house to any other house on Richards Ave, that would be extremely overwhelming. And I think a lot of my neighbors would agree. And there are other examples of ADUs attached and detached on Richards that may suggest that you can have less than 1,000 and still be sufficient.
Yep.
So I guess that's where I rest my thoughts, but I may have more. Thank you.
Jane?
Yes, I just really, I think I have mostly a process question and then an initial comment. I have like so many comments, I don't really know how to quite organize them at this particular second, but my process question is that I think that the public asked very good questions and made very good comments, and so I just want to make sure I understand how those are going to be addressed one by one. They cover many of my own questions. I think that's important. I also think that in terms of process, in terms of this conversation, I think we need to really actually start on page 5 of the document, which is the actual purpose and eligibility for accessory dwelling units. Before we get, there's lots of weeds and there's lots of moving figures, but I guess my initial comment is that I think that this section about purpose and eligibility and definition of accessory dwelling unit later on in the document, et cetera, it needs to be really specific in ways that I don't see in terms of limiting its uses. I think there's one place in the document where it says it won't be used for business. Instead of that, I think it should be explicit about no short-term rentals, no commercial use. These, as stated in our staff memo, the whole ADU issue is kind of rolled up with, quote, senior housing facilities. I mean, I want us all to be collectively clear about who the intended users of the ADUs are to be, other than, of course, the owner who has the choice of living in the ADU or living in the principal residence. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting really clear about intended purpose, about limits, about who is going to be using these. That's one general comment. And then my other general comment for now is about back to density, neighborhood compatibility and character, and parking, because all of those are interrelated. And the problem is that multiple ADUs are already going into small neighborhoods, my own included. And with parking, that I don't exactly know the answer. I mean, I'm not sure that I do agree that a 2-bedroom unit should then automatically refer to 2 parking spaces, because we have little side streets that are, I have no idea where people are going to park when we get into snow situations, for instance. When you end up with a tiny house that was only 1,000, square foot Cape, and now you've got a 750 unit, square foot unit with 2 bedrooms, and now you've got 4 cars and 5 cars trying to park. There's not the lawn space, there's certainly not the side space, and there's abutting neighbors that have to back out into all of those cars that are additionally parked on tiny side streets. So the density issue is one that's going to grow. It's not just as it is and looking at individual ADUs. I think it's something we really need to think about with regards to, we're trying to make it easier. We're trying to have a higher prevalence of ADUs. What that kind of density inside small residential neighborhoods is going to look like. I think there's a huge discussion to be had about parking, is my point. But I think we should start with answering the public's questions. They were specific and very good. And then I think we should go into the actual eligibility section to make sure that there's harmony about that. I don't even think that that section is clear. And then there's, lots of detail. I'm not sure how to proceed.
Okay, well, to answer your process question, the planning board is charged with having a public hearing on the zoning amendment proposal and making a recommendation to council. Now, we can make a recommendation based on the draft we have tonight. We can make suggestions for edits to the draft we have tonight, or we can say that we think there additional changes are needed that we can't cover with a conversation with Rick at the podium. So we'd have to continue the public hearing for another conversation with work in between. I think those are the three options. It's the council that has the final authority to either adopt or not adopt the zoning amendment, as we all know, and they have additional public process. But this is the first time this proposal has come to the full board. It is a very important topic. It's a very important topic for the city. It's a very important topic statewide, and I do think we have to get it right. And I know the Land Use Committee, which, by the way, I am on the Land Use Committee. I didn't attend the last meetings because of client conflicts, but earlier in the year I did attend. The vice chair is also a member, and Councilor Moreau, of course, runs the Land Use Committee. So we have representation on it, but this is the first time it has come to the planning board. So this is our first official planning board process, and this board needs to be comfortable with the public input and its own input before sending it on to council. So I don't know if that helps, hinders, maybe people can understand things a little bit better. Any other board comments? Andrew, again?
Only because I have, recency bias towards it. We had a proposal with a detached ADU, and there were some concerns about drainage and lighting with that proposal. And so I'm wondering if that, under the revised standards with attached ADUs, it has now compliance with drainage and lighting requirements as a zoning ordinance. And so is that going to be a full drainage plan? I don't know who I'm asking because they're all on it.
That would be a question for staff.
It could be, it depends on how the board decides to do it. You could look at you wouldn't want to have a full drainage plan for every single application that came in, obviously. So you'd want to, if you had one that came in for a conditional use permit and you had some questions about it, you could send it back for a plan. I think this is something that you're going to need to look at on a case-by-case basis, because otherwise you're just going to be undercutting the whole purpose of this, which is to provide some more affordable housing.
I'm not sure that I understand your answer.
Well, I mean, I don't think that every, if you have a detached accessory dwelling unit added on top of an existing garage, it wouldn't make any sense to require, you're not doing anything to the site, it wouldn't make any sense to require a drainage plan in that situation.
Sure.
So I think that you're going to need to look at this on a case-by-case basis. And when a plan comes in with a new structure that is, in an area that, neighbors coming to the public hearing say we've got drainage concerns here, then you may just determine that you need to hold off on making the approval and ask them for a drainage plan. I just don't think it's a.
It seems very subjective.
Yeah, it's not subjective, but it's case specific.
And we did that recently.
Right. But now, so my question, I guess, is how is that specified in these revised standards? And I'm asking simply because I don't understand it myself. So is there a way that we can say if you're creating a new building versus if you're just adding it on top of your garage? Clarity.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure that it's always going to be the case that you're going to require a complete drainage plan for a new accessory structure. So I think that-
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. So I think that you have the power as a planning board when you're reviewing a plan to say, we need more information.
Sure, but the reason we heard it most recently, among concerns from the board itself, we had a lot of abutters speak out in that same concern. And so if it does not go to the abutters because it's by right or what have you, then they may not even know, and we may not know, given that we don't live there or around there.
Right. So I guess that would be the case in a small, well, the only time you're actually getting a by right situation is when it's within an existing building. So you're not, anything that involves an expansion
Sure.
or a new building is going to come to you for a conditional use permit and public hearing, and the neighbors are going to be notified in the way they normally are. So I think you're always going to have that option to request that information.
Okay.
Jim, and then
I
Corey.
have one comment and 3 questions. Addressing Mr. Mahana's issue with architectural standards, I just had an idea that maybe if it was reworded to say same or similar in appearance.
Kind of should or shall, same thing. Go back to the way it was.
I just thought, well, yeah, it's just either it's the same material or a different material that looks the same. So anyway, that's just a thought. My first question has to deal with the notice to abutters. Does that cover the mail notice? Is that for everyone or just the ones for administrative approval?
So, no, if it's a conditional use permit, it's going to follow the same provisions as you have for any conditional use permit now, so it's mailed notice.
Okay.
If it's the concern that the land use committee had and that many of the neighbors had was what happens when you've got something that is an administrative approval that doesn't require a conditional use permit. And the final wording that the committee came up with, or actually staff came up with it, was this position point on 814611 about posting a notice for a period of 30 days in a clearly visible location along public streets.
Okay. And in general, when a butter's notified, is that by certified mail?
I have to ask the staff.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. My second question is, does Portsmouth have a minimum square footage for a dwelling unit?
I don't know.
We can't for accessory dwelling units.
So
You're talking about any dwelling unit.
any dwelling unit can
Nobody goes-
is
I
there
don't
a
think-
minimum size that a human can occupy?
Well, there may be a state health standard. I can't.
Right, or a building code. That might
State
be
building code. Yeah, it wouldn't be specific to Portsmouth.
Not in the zoning.
Okay. And my third question is, just curious about an update on the number of ADUs in Portsmouth right now.
Don't know.
27 or something?
That sounds right. I mean, we can check. We can.
27 is what we were hearing.
It's in that general vicinity.
Okay. That's it.
We can just confirm that.
Yes.
Just to continue, when it's a permitted use, the signage, but the direct abutters around that permitted use also get the notice information in a mail letter, mailed to them in the regular mail, so that they would get it both ways. Just for the direct abutters, not the whole, like they do for conditional use permit.
Okay.
No, Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. And I know we discussed this at the Land Use Committee, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around. So how did we settle on for 10.814.333 in the case of a single-story building? I remember having this discussion and I forgot where it went, so help me jog my memory. If you have an example of someone with a single-story building and they want to add a 2-story garage with an ADU on top, as it's written, they cannot, correct?
Correct.
But I know we had the discussion of that, so I forget how it went. Maybe Nick knows, but in essence, if I had a 2-story house, then I could do that.
You could do that, provided that the addition can't be greater than 75% of the existing building,
Height-wise.
height-wise, yes.
Yeah. So
And so, but you can't possibly do that with a single-story building, right? So that was why if you said you're going to, if you're going to add a story, you can, if you have a single-story, single-family dwelling, you can either go up or go out, but you can't do both.
yeah. So, but you can currently put a 2-story garage with an open space if you have a single-story house.
Right. I mean, if you
The physical building can be the same size. It's the ADU aspect that's changing.
Right,
it.
so basically, I guess what you're saying is you could probably put because we don't,
And this goes back to that conversation we had about accessory buildings and,
Right.
you know, limitations on those.
so if you're building a new accessory dwelling unit, a new structure to hold an accessory dwelling unit with a single-story building, of course, the section you're looking at is attached. It's not detached. So I'm going to have to go back and look at this and see what it says on the next
Right.
page.
Yeah, and I don't think detached, it may call it something different, but yeah, just in principle,
It can be taller in a detached.
it can be taller in the detached.
It can be taller in the detached, yes.
Yes.
And that was where we talked about
Separation away from the
increasing the
principal.
setbacks.
Right.
Additional
Increase the
setbacks.
setbacks.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
All right.
Did everybody follow that conversation?
Sorry.
Was that it, Cory? or
Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Any other board? Anybody new? You don't want to say anything?
I mean, I'm happy to answer some questions. If you don't mind, I'll tackle the architectural designs. I get that they seem more restrictive, but the idea was when you're going to have some permitted uses, we were trying to give people direction and to be able to give the staff direction on what to look at. I know that there were some questions that seemed like one thing was contradictory to the other as far as talking about the 1,600 square foot. So when we're talking on like 814-434, the building footprint of the entire building, so we're just taking the footprint, can't be greater than 750 square feet. The 1,600 is actually talking about the entire gross floor area of the building. So it's volume, it's going on multiple floors, it's not just the footprint. So it might seem like we're talking about the same things, but it is actually two different things and talking about different areas. So when you're talking about the administrative approval section and you start talking about the planning director has the right to say, I don't think this is a permitted use, it's going to kick it to the planning board to then have a conditional use permit. So the planning director has the right to say, I don't think you conform based off of the standards here, and now you need to get a conditional use permit. At which point then it does go to the planning board to then go through that process. So I'm hoping that answered some of the questions that came up earlier. If there's more, I'm happy to try to explain based off of what I know.
Thank you. Andrew, you had a,
Again, like, I know I might be the youngest one here, but I did, like, past fourth grade. I know how to read. I know how to, like, digest these things. But I'm now in the zoning ordinance, and I'm looking at all these character district illustrations with nice shading and really good depictions of what is allowed and what is suggested, and it even goes into, like, pocket parks and plazas, yada, yada. So all I'm trying to say is I think some illustrations would allow me to have, like, an aha moment, and I think would also allow the public to have some aha moments where if you live on Richards Ave and you see that, or you get in the mail, you know, so-and-so is doing a detached ADU, I don't know what that means. What if I don't know what that means or have any perception of what that is going to do to my property? If I can log on to the zoning ordinance and get some sort of indication of, like, oh, that's what that is going to look like, or even a rough reference. In our zoning ordinance, we have specific buildings in Portsmouth in certain character districts that are called out and say, hey, here's an example of this. And so I think that's maybe one of my points is, like, it doesn't take much to go around, take some photos. Hey, this is an attached ADU. Here's a detached ADU. And then even, like, having some technical components that illustrate or, again, provide some parameters for neighbors and abutters that they can look at to get a better digestion point of what is going on. That's going to help me with some clarity, and I think it would help the public as well.
I think that's really directed to the staff.
Right,
because-
and I believe the ADU handbook, that's the
That's what
gonna-
Beth was
Right,
mentioning.
That's the goal of that. It's going to be able to walk the citizens through that, but also have illustrations of what things will look like.
But that's a little bit cart before the horse. We're trying to approve a telephone book that doesn't have the pictures.
I think what we're hearing is that at least some people are saying that the handbook should have illustrations in it because that hasn't been determined yet. So having worked on several form-based codes myself, I'm a proponent of having illustrations as well. So I think they're very useful. I don't know that we have to have those to look at this, but I
No,
get your point.
by no means. And I'm not I'm just trying to get my point across in an articulate way, so I apologize. But I know that I brought this up to a neighbor of mine on Richards Ave, and I said, the planning board's kind of reviewing and recalling some of the ADU parameters. And she said, so what's that? And I was like, you have an ADU on your house. And she was like, oh, no, that's an in-law. And I was like, yeah, that's what we're talking about. So, again, definition versus illustration. And clarity, no matter who you may be in the city, it's always nice to have two forms of direction.
Again, that's something that will have to be discussed with the staff and/or the land use committee.
But you sit on that,
No, I was just hired to help work on this. I'm a consultant.
on the land use committee.
No, I have assisted the land use committee. I'm not on the land use committee.
You have a stake in it.
He's a wordsmith.
Right.
Yes, Jane.
Yeah, then I would just like to, be on the record to say that I agree with the public comments that I've heard. I actually think that the whole provision for the fourth type of DADU that allows for up to 1,000 square feet, I just think it should be dropped. I think it should be capped at 750 square feet due to concerns about an accessory dwelling unit looking and being and operating in an accessory fashion. There's a lot of primary residences in Portsmouth that are 1,000 square feet, and as we build more and more micro units, they're going to be well under 1,000 square feet. So I just don't see any reason why we're making it so possible to have bigger units than the state statute. I don't agree with it, so that's my comment. And again, it also relates to parking, noise, density, neighborhood character. We don't need it.
Anybody else? I have some comments. Nobody else does. I'll agree with I'm concerned about the maximum size. I think 1,000 square feet is too big for the city of Portsmouth. I think the state standard of 750, which is a statewide standard that applies in many rural areas as well, is fully adequate. So that's the first comment. I'm concerned about the permitted administrative approvals, even with the notice provisions, because it doesn't give members of the public a chance to come to this room and speak their minds and let us know the drainage issues and other things that just don't show up because the landowner is not going to bring those to the attention of the planning director if they are trying to get something as a matter of right. In that regard, whether they're all done or not, in the single-family residence A and B and general family residence A and B, two-family dwellings aren't permitted, and yet we're allowing inside existing buildings these up to 600 square feet as administrative approval. That to me seems like a character-changing aspect to a neighborhood that perhaps shouldn't be allowed. There are a number of issues here in my mind. There's the statewide issue of trying to provide more affordable housing, which is critically important. But also we have to be careful about neighborhood character, and that goes to the heart of every aspect of a zoning ordinance. And I think if we are not allowing two-family dwellings, why should we allow an accessory dwelling unit, which is by definition another dwelling? It can have another family in it by definition, as a matter of administrative permit. That seems to me a missed point. I've got other comments, but I'm just going to skip through the major ones that I see. the definition of detached accessory dwelling units not being accessory buildings, it's in 814-133. I think rather than saying that the big red truck isn't red and it isn't big, we should say if we have detached accessory buildings, they have separate setback criteria, because they are accessory, or they should be. By being reduced in size and scale to the principal dwelling, that's the definition of accessory. And that just, it's a more of a cleanup thing than anything substantive. This is kind of a big one. How do you measure the gross floor area of an attached accessory dwelling unit that is in fact attached to a major building? Definition of gross floor area is entire building.
I'll have to look at that. I thought it was within the walls of the unit, but it's not.
Mr. Chairman, we had this discussion about heated versus unheated, and we had to take that into account with an ADU that we approved, and it should be defined.
Well, in some jurisdictions, it's living area,
Yep.
as opposed to, say, storage space, like attic space that, might just purely be storage, may not be heated, that sort of a
Conditioned
thing.
or unconditioned, yeah.
But gross floor area is a very inclusive term, and it seems to me it contradicts. I know the intent, and I'm with the 750 square feet. Obviously it's state law requirements, so we better be with the 750, but that seems reasonable. And could you explain 814-331 to me about the doors on a dwelling unit? It
So
says
this is an existing regulation. So the existing regulation says if there are two or more doors in front of the dwelling, one door should be designed as the principal entrance and the other door should be designed to appear to be secondary. And the change that was made here was to insert the words principal and unit, so that it says in front of the principal dwelling unit instead of in front of the dwelling. So there's no substantive change to this.
I'm just trying to understand it. So the idea is that one door would be for the accessory dwelling unit and one door would be for the principal. Is that
Yeah,
the intent?
it's just to maintain the character of the single-family home, to have one door appear to be a front door and the other one appear to be a secondary door.
What if I'm proposing to put an accessory dwelling unit on a house that already has two doors? Do I have to change the doors?
I would say no. It's not really clear if you have that. I mean, it's two doors facing the street. I suppose that can happen in some situations, but normally that would happen. One would look like a front door.
Well, I like the front door to look like a front door.
Yeah, right.
We all do, but and even though this was in the existing ordinance, it doesn't say what you just said. If it were two existing doors, or if it's a new door, if it's a new door for an accessory dwelling unit, it should be designed to appear to be secondary. I mean, that's what you're saying. It should say, right?
We could change we didn't try to look that deeply into the existing ordinance, but you could actually make that change.
Okay.
Yeah, you heard it.
I circled the notice requirements for the permitted uses. It's a good way to do it. If you're going to have administrative approval, that's a good way to do it. I'm not in favor of administrative approval for these. I'd rather have very simple, have a separate set of conditional use permit criteria that are just simple checkbox, but give abutters the opportunity to come to the public meeting to be heard. I don't think it should be held upstairs. That's my personal opinion. Another one of the members of the public raised this. Generally, in 814-612, if you have administrative approval, the planning director, if he or she determines that the application does not comply with the standards of 814, goes to the planning board. And then the first requirement there is that the planning board has to determine that it does apply with the standards of 814. it seems like there's just a missing clause there, unless waived, as a part of the CUP process.
Are you entirely within 612?
612, and then the next section, 814, 621. 612.
Got it, okay. Yep, I see.
I agree with one of the folks. The way it's worded right now, conditional use permit, the way I read it, wouldn't allow the planning board to waive parking. I think that should be permitted, given the conditions specific to a neighborhood and a particular site. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about that.
Isn't it true that we can waive any point of a conditional use permit if we so choose?
Well, the 81463 says we can do it for 81430 through 50, but not, the parking is in.
It's in 20.
Different section.
So maybe we just need to add the
I think-
additional section.
If you added that section, that would give the board the authority.
I thought, and again, any kind of substantive changes probably have to go back to the land use committee, I would assume. But I thought there was a specific decision not to allow a reduction in off-street parking. That's why we excluded that section from this.
That's a great explanation. Personal opinion, I think there should be the flexibility, but that's my personal opinion.
I think there's some members of city council that would agree. They didn't want there to be any parking requirements, so.
I mean, the other overarching thing that I didn't say, it ties into the size thing. I mean, we are looking at a planet with increasingly limited resources and trying to promote less auto dependence and, smaller size units that aren't required to have multiple parking spaces, provide more opportunities for those, more conservation of building space, less traffic potentially. I know from the work I do, if you provide parking, you generally generate more trips. You get more driving when you have more parking. It's a fine balance, and there are certain neighborhoods in the city where you absolutely will need at least 2 more spaces for some of these, but other parts of the city, and that's why I say the flexibility would be useful, especially in the nearer the downtown. I'm again speaking personally, I would see many waivers for parking requirements. So that's my input on that one. Any other board comments? Yes, Jane.
Yeah, back to the parking section at the very end, which is the 10.111.3.20, location of parking facilities on a lot. This makes a point about not allowing any of the parking to be located in front yards. And again, in very small neighborhoods with multiple residences, multiple ADUs, I don't understand how that is going to be possible. We're going to get into snow removal issues. I don't know how, I literally don't see any other place where people are going to be able to park. The lots aren't that big.
So just to clarify, what this says is, so the existing ordinance, I don't know whether you're looking at the marked up copy or the clean copy, but the existing ordinance has everything except for the parenthetical phrase in it. So basically, right now, the city doesn't allow parking required off-street parking spaces to be between the front yard, a principal building, and a street, except for single-family dwellings and two-family dwellings, where we do allow, the city does allow parking in the front yard. And because this is really in the area of trying to fix something where the city wasn't in compliance with state law, because the state requires that, in the case of attached accessory dwelling units, that the regulations and an accessory dwelling unit, we felt that we had to include this parenthesis in there because Otherwise, we'd be stricter. We wouldn't be allowing something. We would have a regulation, a city regulation for an accessory dwelling unit that, or a city regulation for a single-family dwelling that wasn't available to a single-family dwelling and an accessory dwelling unit. I mean, it's really technical. It's really just trying to make the regulations comply with, comport with state law, specifically in the case of attached accessory dwelling units.
Yeah.
So this provision allows parking to be between the front of the building and the street. It doesn't prohibit it.
Because it has so many knots in one little tiny paragraph, and I understand, I guess that language already existed, but, it could be, the language could be clearer, like that an exception is made in the case of, or something, because you've got lots of negatives in 3 sentences. Again, I think it's going to change the character of our neighborhoods to see cars parked and taking up entire front yards, right? We're going to, any sense of green space, it's going to be cars. We're going to have crowded residential areas with, when we start getting into multiple ADUs in these neighborhoods, and I'm already seeing it.
So, Rick, with what you were saying, would it be correct to maybe change it to say that the restrictions shall not apply to single-family dwellings and accessory dwelling units? Just make it simpler?
Well, I think that might, I'd have to look at that, because then you might say, well, does it apply to single-family dwellings by themselves? You know what I mean? If you say it applies to single-family dwellings and accessory dwelling units. We'd have to look at the wording, but you could, because then you also have to include 2-family dwellings in there too.
Are they already accepted? I don't remember.
They're already accepted, yes. The only thing that is being changed here is the parenthetical phrase. That's being added in.
Adding single family with an accessory dwelling.
So what about a detached, I don't remember, it might have been a meeting I missed, a detached accessory dwelling unit, could that parking be in the front yard?
Yes.
So then it should just be the 3 situations, single family, 2-family, and accessory dwelling units. That's the exemption.
Could work on the wording.
I mean, wording aside, is that
That's what's meant,
intent?
yes.
Is that the intent?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Any other board comments? I did keep the public hearing open. I don't know if any members of the public would like, well, before I do that, Nick, did you have anything to add? I know you're suffering at home sick. You're still with us?
Yes, I'm still here. Just a couple of comments. I agree with Rick. I think Andrew, Jane, and certainly members of the public brought up the issue of the size of the unit, and I think it's been made clear by Rick, Tinker, and Beth that there's no real magic to the 1,000 square feet. We've had a few applications come in the last couple of years that have asked for waivers to get to a larger size than 750, which is why we created the conditional use permit, to be clear, given there was some dispute as to whether the planning board had the authorization to grant a unit larger than 750 square feet, using that provision towards the end of the existing ordinance. So I think the land use committee, we put it in there to provide the planning board the discretion to say yes or no if somebody has a sufficient lot area and arrangement of structures on it to have an ADU that's bigger than 750 square feet. And one project that comes to my mind is the recent application on Belle Isle, with that very large property with an ADU, which would clearly support up to 1,000 square feet and clearly be subordinate to the existing principal structure or the proposed structure that was part of that project. So again, I don't think there's magic to it. I think what's really critical in listening to some of the public comments, and I think it was addressed by Rick and others on the board, that the subordination requirements really limit the ability in many instances in the more densely developed portions of Portsmouth to get over the 750 square feet. You can't be more than 75% of the height of the existing structure. You can't be more than 750 square feet of the footprint, and you can't be more than 75% of the existing volume of the principal structure on the lot. So there are binding constraints beyond the 750 square foot maximum. I think Jim's offering or idea for the architectural design standards of inserting similar in appearance, if that's what Jim said, I totally agree with that in addressing some of the concerns about the potential for rigidity in interpreting what the same or similar means, because the intent is not to duplicate verbatim what the existing principal structure is in respect to the ADU. So if that takes us to a better place, I think that's a good suggestion. I think Andrew's and others' request to see some examples is something I think staff can prepare if we're coming back to this at a subsequent meeting. And I do think the handbook that we're going to be putting together should be illustrative to make it easier for people to understand what's expected when they come before the planning board and have to address with subordination requirements and the architectural design standards. And I agree with, I think, Jane and Rick and maybe others that brought up the parking requirements, that it makes sense the planning board have, again, flexibility to waive in certain instances the full requirements as a baseline in the ordinance. And then lastly, I think we really struggled in the land use committee to address the issue of an as-of-right scenario or a new administrative approval process for very limited projects, very limited ADUs within existing structures. And I think it's fair to be concerned about establishing a new administrative approval process that we don't currently have, with a sign that has to go out and still notice to direct abutters, still with certified mail. We've almost, in moving through that conversation at the land use committee, we've almost arrived at almost the same place as a conditional use permit, that it may make sense to send everything, as is the case today, to the planning board for approval. So I'll end there, but I'm certainly going to sit down with Rick and others to go through the comments tonight, and if you'll afford us the opportunity, make some changes that we can discuss in a subsequent meeting.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Any other board? Yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'm done.
One thing, Chairman, I was just thinking about the whole permitted use in the SRA, GRB, or SRB. As far as, like you indicated, or I'm sorry if I had those zones wrong, but the ones that only allow one single family dwelling. I know one thing that we had discussed quite a bit was the fact of lot size and trying to get rid of that requirement, where we have lots that meet the actual lot size. Maybe that's a place we could actually still allow a permitted use, even though, yes, it becomes two dwellings, but the lot size itself is generally much bigger than what the typical lot size is, because typically most lots don't actually meet the square foot requirements. So that would kind of fit a little bit with the way we kind of have it worded, where it has to meet entirely within an actual accessory dwelling building or accessory building, or it has to be entirely within the existing structure. So it, it helps. Maybe just another suggestion I was just thinking of.
Yeah, I think, and as I think about it, as I recall the state law, which I don't have in front of me, and you can help me out on this, Rick, I think if you permit a single-family dwelling, you have to permit an accessory dwelling unit. Is that correct?
It's actually, not quite that clear. Basically, in any district where you allow single-family dwellings, you must allow attached accessory dwelling units. And you can require a conditional use permit or a special permit for them, a special exception for them. So that's the way the existing ordinance is structured. We allow attached accessory dwelling units in every district where a single-family dwelling unit is permitted, but we do require a conditional use permit, even though the single-family is allowed as of right. So you have to allow them in that district, but you don't have to allow them as permissively as you do the single-family dwelling.
Okay, that explains it. I think my concern remains that where we're not allowing two-family dwellings, but we are allowing accessory dwelling units as we should, I don't think that should be an administrative approval. And the other question, as Corey brought up and one of the members of the public brought up, and I hadn't really thought about this, but it's a good point. I think Liza Hewitt mentioned it. On non-conforming lots of a small size, should there be a density calculation that relates in some fashion or relates to the size? And that's going to be a difficult, will require a look at the state statute, because I know there's lot coverage and other restrictions that can't be addressed. But on non-conforming lots, I think it may be different. So I don't know if I don't remember that conversation, but again, I didn't get to all the meetings, so. If there's nothing else up here, I'm going to let the public give us some last comments, if they have any.
This is Bradder, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. The whole idea of having permitted things was, if I remember correctly, was not really related to the Land Use Committee. I think that's what the City Council asked the Land Use Committee to do, was to allow it to be more streamlined. The restrictions on the mailing and stuff are things that the public brought forward and said, you got to have a sign by the street so people can see it. People should get stuff in the mail in case you're in Florida or on vacation, or you don't live here at all in the winter, and now you have a sign that you're never going to see. So I agree with you in what you're saying in terms of but I think that the Land Use Committee was assigned the job of coming up with a way to make it easier, I guess would be a way to put it, to get them without having to go through meetings and stuff. So that was why there were different ideas that came up as to how to make it possible for the public to be aware that it was decided you can't see that in a newspaper, not nowadays, before everybody read it. And the best way to do that would be to send letters directly to the people who are going to be most affected by it, which are the direct abutters. So, not that I agree with it, but it's what was assigned.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Peter Huda, 280 South Street. Just some clarifications for questions. Andrew, 10-814-437, looks like the only place that drainage would be addressed. I did have a question on that, but I let it go. It basically says, shall comply with drainage requirements listed under section 10-1320. My question was defined as what? So you have to go cross-reference whatever it says here, and this is under the DADU section. So I don't know if it would apply to the ADU section and how you would know that. The other thing I still have a confusion on is 10-814-32 and 33. It seems that these two contradict each other. One says 22 feet, the other one, I don't know what it says. It's very confusing to me. Basically, you have to, the required setback from a property line shall be increased between the difference of the building height between the DADU and the principal building. That's still confusing. The reason I was confused on the next one, 10814-434, the building footprint of the entire building containing a DADU shall be no greater than 750. The next one, 435, says the gross floor area of the entire building containing the DADU shall not be greater than 1,600. So if I add, and of course I had to do this, the 750 and 750 is 1,500. So if you're even putting something on top of something, are you saying in one you can't do it, but in the other one you can and it could hang over? So that was my confusion there. I don't know if you could answer that, but it just didn't make any sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? What's the board's pleasure? We have the three options I mentioned earlier.
Can I make a motion? Make a motion to continue the public hearing until which time we get to see a fully vetted version 2 of this ordinance. Meaning if it has to go through land use committee, it has to go through land use committee. The suggestion in the staff memo was to continue it till next month, but that doesn't, in my mind, give it enough time to go through land use or whatever. I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have to continue to a date certain.
Okay.
And that would be the reason to pick a date. And let's say we get to the next meeting and we're not ready, I think we could continue again. But I believe that's the legal.
If that's the case, I'll defer to what it says in the it's motion to continue public hearing to February 16th, 2023.
Is there a second for discussion? Was that a second?
Sure.
Just to clarify that, if you continue to a date and time certain, there's no need for a new notice. If you don't do that, you have to renotice it. That's the requirement. So
Makes sense.
With
Thank
this
you.
motion, with this motion and second, there's no requirement to renotice. Any discussion?
I just think that I think Mr. Tanner has a lot of direction from the board and from the public for requested changes. I don't know how those changes will get vetted. I don't know how that can be done in one board meeting, but
Well, there's a land use committee meeting Friday, I believe.
Yes, there is. I'm doing the agenda tomorrow.
I think you might have to rewrite it.
Nick has offered to provide some examples and whatnot. It's perhaps a lot to get done. Yes, Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, it's just quickly kind of going back to the public involvement summary report that was put together over the summer for this. And, you know, really just want folks to keep in mind that, you know, a lot of the comments came in that this is too expensive, too hard, too onerous to do. And so, you know, with that in mind, and also, you know, the whole property right thing, you know, I do think that folks need to be aware of what's going on in their neighborhoods. But once again, a building permit doesn't require abutter notification. You know, tear down your house and build a 3-story in the place. As long as it meets the zoning, you're good to go. Nobody needs to know. Get out a pickleball court in my backyard. Don't need to tell anybody. So I just want to make sure, you know, we don't want to turn Portsmouth into a homeowners association. So I think all the comments tonight were well-founded and just. I just, you know, we just got to keep that in mind as we work on these, not just this zoning ordinance, but all of them. So I'm wholeheartedly in favor of, you know, continuing this conversation, but I just wanted to have folks keep that in mind, along with, you know, the comments that we've got from members of the public, both folks who have gone through this process, engineers, architects, who have been involved with it as well. So.
Thank you. And just to clarify, because I did speak to some of those engineers and architects, and I am one of those beasts. So the idea of bringing more here isn't to create a burden. I would see a separate set of criteria that are really, you know, a hand sketch and no drainage, nothing. It's basically just a purpose to give the abutters a chance to have a public meeting. That would be the only additional requirement, which, as Nick said, it's basically almost the same as what's being required already with the notice and the sign and the mailing and everything. It's just, what does the abutter do if they get the letter and they see the sign? What do they do with it? Do they talk to the planning director?
They can appeal it as an administrative appeal, and it goes to the ZBA.
But if there's an issue that could be raised at a public meeting like we had on the drainage in that one recently, the planning board could consider it. I don't know. It's a difference of opinion, and I respect the other side's opinion. That's all. Yes, Jim.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up what Corey said about making this process as user-friendly as possible. And I think he's right. A lot of people have come up. They don't want to jump in. It's way too confusing for the average person to understand what you have to go through to get an ADU. And so I hope that everyone involved keeps the end user in mind when they're preparing this, because that's what we're here to do. We're not here to produce a document for the planning board or the planning department to use. We're preparing a document for the public to use. And I hope everyone remembers that when we want to make this simple. And I read these ordinances a lot, and it's confusing for me. So I think we should work hard on that end.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, that's what I think the handbook will really do. We need the code to be legally defensible, but the handbook can be what really explains it in words that hopefully every homeowner can read. We can put pictures in. Like, none of the decisions on what it's going to look like yet have really been made, just the fact that we want one, and how we put that together will be one of the steps. Once we know what the actual legal language is going to be, we can then put together that handbook for everyone.
Counselor, how do you see the handbook flowing through this board, I guess, and the land use committee as far as input, that sort of thing?
Haven't really thought that much, and since the person on staff that's going to be doing it just started today,
Yep.
I might want to have a discussion with that person first to see what kind of input they might be looking for.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add
Yes.
to the conversation? The gentleman who started with us today is named Howard Snyder. He will be at Land Use Committee on Friday. I'm sure he will make himself available to the planning board. He had a previous commitment tonight, otherwise he would have been here. But we look forward to his addition to the team.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are continued to that February 16th, I think the date was.
Yes.
Correct.
Public hearing remains open, but the meeting is closed. Thank you very much.